Federer, who is, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just making sure. And so your book was recommended to me by a friend, and it's A Real History of Socialism from Plato to the Present, how the deep state capitalizes on, what is it, crises for control? Or how the deep state consolidates control, capitalizing on crises. I'm butchering it. I was at first intimidated when my friend sent it to me. It's like, hey, I think you'd really like this. And my wheelhouse is I'm a biology major, but I love talking about like Cold War, weaponry and stuff. And I looked at it and I was like, this might be a little above my head. But I went through it. I listened to it from cover to cover. I had my Kindle read it to me. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. You know, I thought it was going to just be a history. But towards the end, when you get into Yuri Bezmenov, the active measures, demoralization, and then I think the most interesting aspect of it all is the perception of making the majority believe that the minority's views are the majority. But I'm doing what I do every podcast now, and I'm talking without letting you introduce yourself. So how about you introduce yourself, Dr. Federer?
Well, hey, it's great to be with you.
Yeah.
The book is called Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present, and then How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crisis to Consolidate Control.
Well, I was close enough.
But you got a good handle on it, so I appreciate that you read it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I don't have on guests that I don't read their book. To me, that's a smack in the face to them. So for everyone listening, I'll put the link in the description as I always do. It's a fantastic book. You can put it on, as I tell everyone, if it's not on Audible, if you get the digital version, you can have your phone or whatever read it to you. That's how I like going through books. The whole thing is, we can't talk about the whole thing, obviously. We can't go into the scope of it all. So I wanted to go into what I often do when I have on guests with, large, voluminous books, is I try to pick out the thing that struck me the most. And to me, perhaps it's because I was born in 1990, because I've been kicked off YouTube twice and I'm on my last strike. To me, the thing that stuck out the most to me was the ability to manipulate the media, thus manipulate the data that the voters get, and thus manipulate their opinions, and thus control who gets elected. Not even going into voter fraud, not even doing any of that. Let's just put that for a different discussion. Just controlling what people get and making people believe that this is what everyone else likes. For instance, if I took one of my videos and somehow manipulated it to say it had 1 million views, it doesn't matter how good the podcast was. People would look at it and they go, "Whoa, this one's got 1 million." And if they watched it, they'd probably go, "Yeah, I think that was his best interview." Even if it's complete crap. How dangerous do you see that becoming in our society? The ability to make the majority believe that the minority's views are those of the majority.
Right. So what you're hitting on is a critical concept. And to give some background, we have to look at marketing. And in the 1800s, you had Wells Fargo wagon and Sears catalog, and they would list every single feature of a sewing machine to try to sell it. But then in the early 1900s, we began to see the advertising campaigns where they would not list what's in it, but just show happy people using the product. And one classic is Crisco.
Okay.
And they never told what it was made out of. They even invented a term called vegetable based. And it was cottonseed. Nobody ate cottonseed oil. They used it in factories and machines. And but their campaign was to have pages in magazines of a happy wife serving food that looked really pretty to a happy family. And in the corner was this little picture of a Crisco can. It was so effective, it put out of business the lard industry. So instead of listing what's in the product, now you hide what's in the product. You just make it look like everybody's using it.
Yeah.
And then we go to 1938, a radio drama called War of the Worlds with actor Orson Welles, We interrupt this program to announce that New Jersey's been invaded by Martians. The whole country instantly panics. Everyone runs outside, looks up in the sky for spaceships. And this was a phenomenon, not just in marketing to motivate people to buy a product, but the fear motivated them to action. And then we see that you had World War II, Joseph Goebbels, propaganda minister for Hitler, and he realized that people want to fit in with what everybody else is doing. So he had these 100,000 seat auditoriums, coliseums, and they would begin to give the Hitler salute at the front. And it would work its way back, and everybody would see everybody else giving the Hitler salute, and they would feel pressured to fit in and comply and give the Hitler salute. And this was studied after the war with the Solomon Asch, A-S-C-H, Asch, conformity experiment done on college campuses, where they would pull 8 students into a room. 7 had been paid ahead of time to be actors. 1 was a naive participant. And the teacher would put 2 cards on the front desk. One card simply had 1 line on it. The other card had 3 lines, one longer, one shorter, one the same. And beginning with the paid actors, they would stand up and convincingly say that the shorter line was equal to the first line. And by the time it got around to the 8th naive participant, 30% of them would change their views, deny their own eyes to fit in with the group. They would doubt their perception. I must not know. And this power of people wanting to fit in with a group is even referenced in the Bible. Here's Peter. He has been with Jesus 3 years. He promises Jesus he's always going to be with him. And then they're with a group around a fire outside of the high priest's house. And this unnamed girl comes up to Peter and says, well, you were with him. Peter denies Jesus. Why? Because he wants to be accepted by this group of strangers around a fire. The power of wanting to fit in with the group was also studied after the Korean War. So these young patriotic men go in, they fight, and they become prisoners of war. And when they get rescued, they hate America. And this was a phenomenon. What happened to these guys? They were brainwashed. Mm-hmm. And it was a term from the Buddhist concept of washing the mind, the Buddhism. And so they would, it's considered an emotional restart. They would put somebody in a room, isolate them, have them go through emotional trauma, and starved from interaction with other prisoners. And they would begin to crave any human interaction. So then they would take him out into a room with a circle of chairs, and the chairs were seated with soldiers who had already caved. And in order for this person to be accepted by the group, he had to confess his whiteness, confess the evil Western capitalistic ways and how bad they were, and then he would be accepted. And this was, it's basically, imagine a dog that's very independent, it's very unruly, and it doesn't like you, and you put it in a room, turn off the lights, lock the door, starve it, it's isolated, barks itself out, it's starving, it's weak, and then you open the door and you give it a little water and food and you pet it. Now this thing will look at you as its benefactor, right? It's an emotional restart. And so they began to realize, how can we do this nationally? How can we put the whole country through an emotional trauma? And then, and so there was a movie in the 1950s, maybe even the 1940s, but it's called Gaslight. The actress Ingrid Bergman was the daughter of a famous actress who had supposedly been given jewels by the royalty, and some guy wants them. And yet everything's locked in the attic from the actress as she died. So this guy marries Ingrid Bergman and then puts her to bed, right? You know how those old movies were. And he leaves the room and he goes out of the house, walks down the street, and it's like, the English houses where they're all connected like Mary Poppins, climbs along the attic, climbs in the attic and turns on the gas light in the attic. And when he does, the gas light in her room gets dimmer. And, the next morning she tells him, and every day. And he responds by saying, oh, you're seeing things. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. You're maybe going insane. You're going. He takes her to a psychiatrist that he had paid off. Yeah, she's going crazy. He's about to commit her to an insane asylum. Then he can take her through the attic all he wants, looking for those jewels. And finally, some hero, travels and follows the guy and sees what he's doing and breaks the story. But it went into our vernacular. This artificial manipulation of the perception to move people to think that they're crazy unless they believe what you tell them to believe. So this gaslighting technique is a national echo chamber, manipulated controlling of the information that people get. And so it's where if you don't say what they want you to say, you get deplatformed, you get censored, you get cut off. And so it's controlling the narrative. And we've been announced on online, right? So everybody craves acceptance and they want to be liked by their friends. They want to be friended. They want to be followed. And the worst thing is to be unfollowed and unfriended. And kids will commit suicide if they're cyberbullied, right? And so this controlled perception through the big media, through big tech, through the fake news, all that, to push a political agenda, not just marketing a product, to buy Crisco or to buy, some cereal or whatever, but it's marketing an ideology and it's marketing a political agenda. The ultimate agenda is you're crazy unless you believe what we tell you to believe. And the ultimate goal is to get people to surrender to the state and set up a dictatorship, like a global type of control.
You do see it in, I think, and that's the importance of kind of being yourself, early on. It may just seem like a trivial character building exercise. Don't care what people think of you. But as I get older, I now understand the true value of being who you are and not being concerned about being accepted. And you see that, you see that on things like Reddit. You see, you don't want to be downvoted. You don't want to be banned. On Reddit, if you post comments that get downvoted enough, they will start to put 14-minute delays on how quickly you can respond. So in an online thread where discussions happen almost in real time like we are right now, if you're delayed even a minute, that's like being told to sit on the sideline. 14 minutes, you're essentially left out of the conversation. And you have to have one response to all the things that were said in the 14 minutes you were set out. And no one's going to read that 2-paragraph response. You effectively get shut out. On YouTube, getting people to unsubscribe, getting people to dislike a video. And then with actual outright censorship. When I had on Claire Lopez, a CIA veteran, we talked about possible CCP interaction in the 2020 election, I was suspended for a week. When I had on Dr. Roger Hodkinson, an MD from Cambridge, and he didn't even come on questioning the vaccine. He said he's pro-vaccine. He said he's questioning the efficacy of lockdowns. I was suspended for 2 weeks. And I can now get one more suspension before I'm off YouTube for good. And thankfully, I'm someone that is thick-headed and thick-skinned, and I don't care. If I get kicked off here, then that is what it is. I'll be on Spotify, I'll be on Rumble, I'll be on BitChute, whatever. But you can see where it does affect the outcome of how others act. Who's behind the scenes pulling this and this sounds like tinfoil hat, but no, we're seeing that this is exactly what it is. And I think perhaps the most lethal aspect of COVID, of the lockdown, sure, people have died, and I'm not trying to belittle that. The fact that for months you were legally not allowed to assemble. For months, your actual, it's one thing when you're watching the news and it's war, genocide, and you're like, blah, 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 and you turn it off and you walk outside and the birds are chirping and you're like, no, this is reality, not that. Don't take that. That stuff's poison. When there's a pandemic and you legally cannot assemble, Your only interaction with the greater world is through a screen. That screen, you're on one of a couple major social media platforms that are all consolidated. You're either using Apple's App Store, who can cut out Parler, or you're using Amazon Web Services, who cut out Parler, or Google Play. They have locked everyone down to where you can only interact with the world not through reality, but rather through a mirroring, a digital bastardization of what reality is, and then they can control everything. And you're in a lockdown, you're in a pandemic. I mean, talk about craving human interaction. Do you really want to be deplatformed off Facebook during a pandemic when there's no interaction? Do you really want the one little sliver of humanity that you get? Do you want that to be slapped down because you posted an anti-Biden meme or a pro-Trump post? We're seeing just how powerful it is. And when you have everyone not seeing everything else, kind of like the panopticon, when no one else sees the big picture, they only see the one sliver of reality that's being given to them. I mean, I believe you touched on it, but I think the CIA's Operation Mockingbird, like, that's not a conspiracy. Like, the head of the CIA said, when everything the United States public believes is false, our mission will be complete. We're seeing the absolute power of this, and the true insidiousness of it is you can't even bring it up because it gets silenced by the very thing that we're bringing up. It'd be like if you wrote a letter to other people in Whoville warning them about the Grinch, but then the Grinch stole that as well. It's like there's a dark irony to it. Do you see any way out of this? It's a problem I've been kind of workshopping in my mind. It seems that we forget, or it's censored, and socialism arises and it turns into communism, and then it kills millions of people, and people say never again, and then it happens again. Is there a way out of it, or is this sort of duck season, wabbit season? Is this just going to go on for millennia? Communism to liberty, to communism to liberty, and we're just going to do this until the end of time. Is there any outcome or way out of it?
There's clearly a global goal in mind.
Sure.
And one of the tactics that I've done is I've written several books on world history. And the most common form of government is a king. And you go from small to bigger to bigger to bigger. So you got Nimrod, Tower of Babel, and the Egyptian pharaohs, and then Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan. And they keep it until finally the King of England had the biggest empire the planet Earth had ever seen. And with military advancements, these kings can kill more people. Instead of killing with a rock, you kill with a bronze weapon or an iron weapon or a big long phalanx spear or scimitar sword the Muslims had, or gunpowder the Chinese invented, right? So the weapon improves, but it's that same fallen nature of Cain, kill, and Abel. But clearly there's a global goal in mind, and that's where it's headed. It's a study of human nature. I get sort of theoretical, but, you have a molecule, H2O. Mm-hmm. And it's its own molecule. But if you put it together with other molecules, it acts in a group fashion. Mm-hmm. Waves in an ocean. All these little molecules get dropped, or clouds in the sky, or ripples in the clouds, or, you have a little fish. It is a little fish, but we put it together with a whole school of fish. It acts as a group. They'll turn on a dime. They'll go. Birds, right? It's an individual bird, but as a group, it'll fly in these flocks and make all kinds of formations. And so an individual is an individual, but we tend to also work as a group. We want to draw identity from each other, and sometimes we say, well, what's everybody else doing, to decide what we're going to do. And so once you can understand that, you can manipulate it. So cattle, they like being in a group, but if a cattle rancher rides up with his horse, shoots a gun in the air, the cattle get scared and they'll all move as a group toward the pen, right? You can herd them in a certain way. And so they found with humans, if you get people to panic, they throw out logic, they throw out their individual reasoning, and they just respond as a group. Oh, it's a panic. It's a stampede. It's, let's get out of the movie theater. And so they've basically successfully manipulated group dynamics. But fear is the main thing that they're using. After World War II, Germany, France, and England gave independence to their former colonies. And so you had brand new countries, and India and Egypt and, Albania and Romania, all these countries, and they get brand new leaders. And they're climbing out of the post-World War II crises and trying to piece together their lives. And it looks hopeful, except the Soviet Union decides that it wants to send in KGB agents who would identify all the groups. Ethnically, Bosnians, Croats, Serbs, religiously, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox, racially, economically, it didn't matter. And they would break them into groups of victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots. And then they would organize the have-nots to do protests, that they would escalate into riots, that they would escalate into violence. And then they would co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame the new leader of the new country for all of the problems. And then they would nurture weak links in the military. And when the country got panicky and confused and fearful enough, they would do a coup or a rigged election, replace the leader with a Soviet puppet, and suddenly the violence would stop. And everybody would think that things were fine, except they just realized they gave up the farm.
Yeah.
And they gave up their free government, and now they're ruled as a Soviet satellite dictatorship.
Yeah.
45 countries fell to communism this way. And so Truman was the president. He does nothing. He thinks the United Nations that he helped form will bring world peace. But the next president is Eisenhower. He can sit back and let these countries fall to the communists, or he can fight fire with fire. And so when Iran sides with the Soviet Union, their leader Mossadegh, Eisenhower approves the first CIA operation to overthrow a country's leader.
Mm-hmm.
John Foster Dulles was the head of the Secretary of State, and then Allen Dulles was the one who approved the plan with the CIA. Allen Dulles is also the one that approved that Mockingbird project you mentioned. So the CIA operative on the ground is Kermit Roosevelt Jr. He's the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, expert in foreign languages. He goes to Tehran and he recruits mobsters and gangsters and radical imams, and they stage protests and riots and attack mosques, and they co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame Mossadegh for all the problems. And when the country gets panicky enough, they put Mossadegh under house arrest, lock him away for the rest of his life where he dies, and they replace him with the Shah, who loved America and had a rightful claim to the throne anyway. But the Shah loved America, and the CIA did the same thing in Guatemala in 1954. The Congo 1960, Dominican Republic, Chile 1973, and the KGB did the same thing, with Brezhnev helping Yasser Arafat to start the PLO and Brezhnev helping Castro to take over Cuba. This is called the Cold War. These are tactics to overthrow a country's leadership, and the only difference this time around is they've been used on American soil.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
It's wasn't there the was it the Smith-Mundt Act, the bill that was repealed, or it's the bill that during wartime the United States would use propaganda, and then we'd repeal it. Like after World War I, we stopped propaganda. There's something called the Black Chamber, which was like the predecessor to the NSA, and it was a couple of the big telegram companies, and like they were all for opening mail and reading and censoring stuff during World War I. And then as soon as the war ended, they put the powers away, right? Kind of in that beautiful Washington could have been president for life, but it's no, you pass the power, you hand it over. And then World War II, the whole censorship kicks up again, the propaganda kicks up again. But after World War II, I believe, and I could be butchering this, but I believe the name of the bill to stop the censorship or the propaganda was Smith-Mundt, M-U-N-D-T. And I believe it was that bill was repealed in like 2012 or 2013, meaning it was no longer illegal for the United States government to use propaganda on U.S. citizens. Just like NSA, we're always, just let loose the dogs, go intercept everything else in the world. Well, eventually that magnifying glass, first in the 70s, and then we see with the Snowden leaks, Clapper lying under oath, we see it come back to the United States. X key score, echelon, stellar wind, and now it's pointed at us. We're kind of seeing that, yeah, we've been doing it for, I mean, again, there's almost a dark irony to it, a dark karma, where it's like we've been toppling these nations for decades. And we've been intercepting everything and all stuff I'm for. I think you need a strong military and a strong outward security state, but we're seeing it start to swing back home. And it seems like that's going on. Now, my question is, we clearly know that there is a communist plot. It's decades old. JFK talked about, for we are opposed around the world by a monolithic, blah, 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 guerrillas by night instead of marching soldiers by day. We know Eisenhower wanted to stop it. We know there's the whole domino theory. Is this thing going on? So let's just play devil's advocate. I am more right-leaning. I am Christian. I am unabashedly pro-American. But for a thought exercise, I do find I have to force myself to try to look at it from the other side. Because otherwise, if it's just you and I agreeing with each other, we're not getting anywhere, So I have to think, if there is this decades-long plot against the West, is there not a parallel? Are we not also doing a decades-long plot against China, against Russia, against Iran, against North Korea? Basically, is this just my mind grasping for something to make it seem not so bad? Is there really, are we in the end stages of Yuri Bezmenov's active measures? Or is that indeed happening, but it's not all for naught? We're also doing something overseas. Or are we about to fall into a technocratic global dictatorship and it's the end of history and, it's the power for the sake of power, 1984, the state will always win, all hail Big Brother. Where are we? Where are we going?
Yeah. Well, I draw my inspiration from the Bible, and it is one of the stories we like best. It's when God's people are in a hopeless situation, and God raises up little nobodies who are small in their own eyes, but big in faith and courage, and God uses them to turn things around. So you got an 80-year-old Moses against Pharaoh, who's the most powerful military leader at the time. You have your teenager David against Goliath. You got, a scared Gideon against 100,000 Midianites. And those are the stories we like. And so the good Lord chose for us to be alive right now. And he loves to wait until things look hopeless. And then he raises up you and me and others to stand up and have backbone and trust him and see things turn around. Jesus says the wheat and tares grow together till the harvest. We get through this problem, there'll be another one. We get through that one, there'll be another one. But this is our turn. Mm-hmm. So we do need to stand up. I do want to mention that concept, the fifth column. Mm-hmm. Now it goes back to Greece. And so Athens was a democracy city with 6,000 citizens, and they didn't have a king. All the citizens would get together in the marketplace and talk politics. And there was Philip of Macedon. He was the father of Alexander the Great, and he was conquering other Greek city-states, Amphipolis and Thebes and different places. And the people of Athens were getting panicky and wanting to organize themselves to fight Philip of Macedon. Well, Philip conquered an area where they had gold. And he took the gold and he bribed some citizens of Athens to stand up in their agora marketplace during their city meetings and sow division and say, wait a second, let's not get carried away. I hear Philip's not such a bad guy. I hear that Philip's not conquering these cities, he's liberating them. And the people actually liked Philip. And these paid liars would gather around themselves what Lenin later called useful idiots, people that believed the lie. And when the following grew, it divided the city of Athens so they could not have a unified response. And when Philip marches up to the gates, they weren't organized enough to fight him. They just throw open the gates. He takes over. And the people of Athens did not get a chance to rule themselves again for over 2,000 years. Right? So after Philip came his son, Alexander the Great. And after him came, the Romans, and then, the Ottoman Empire. And then finally, after World War, II, they got free. But then they got into the EU and got in debt. And now their fate's still not their own. And so it's very rare that people get a chance to rule themselves. But this idea of fifth column, and the idea of infiltrating in unnoticed. Oh, so the fifth column was these paid people on the inside. During World War I, Woodrow Wilson, talked about that. There was even during a threatened war with France, during the time of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And that's why they passed the Anti-Sedition Act, because they were afraid. The British during the Revolution had the writs of assistance where they got to read everybody's mail. And so the concept is tried and true, but we've been experiencing it in America in a greater degree. I remember when, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter stopped the tracking of known spies that were coming into America. The government was keeping track of them. But then they okay, now they can sort of go free. Whittaker Chambers is an interesting person. He was a communist who worked his way up to become the editor of Time magazine. And he would write articles that were pro-socialist and so forth. A famous story is William Randolph Hearst, Spanish-American War. And the Spaniards were treating the people of Cuba terribly. They were starving to death. They had prison camps, like concentration camps almost. And but America was busy doing all of our stuff. And so William Randolph Hearst sent a graphic artist, because this was before the days of all the photographing, for the newspapers, Frederick Remington. And so he's sent to Cuba, and the famous line is, Hearst told Remington, "You supply the pictures, I'll supply the war." So you give us pictures of how bad the situation is, and I'll fan it into flame across this country. We'll get the war. But that had, after the war, you had the desire to control stories on foreign policy. And then they realized only a small number of newspapers actually have foreign correspondents, and the smaller newspapers just take their foreign stories from the larger ones. And so really just controlling a small number of newspapers, they could formulate the opinion of Americans either for or against a certain war. And they figured that, well, this is for national defense. We need to be able to mobilize our people. And during World War II, Eisenhower even had a department of motion pictures. And the U.S. Army helped make patriotic motion pictures. Yeah. Guys going off into war and being courageous and coming back heroes. And they would even have recruiting tables in the lobby of the movie theater. And, but it was all for a patriotic purpose. But then in the 1960s, the communists began to infiltrate Hollywood. They attacked Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism, and they were, going on a witch hunt to catch communists. Well, lo and behold, there was a Viktor Matrotkin in the 1980s who defected from the Soviet Union with 25,000 pages, and he proved that they were infiltrating Hollywood. And they did have people on their payroll and so forth, and even Time magazine, like Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers had a bunch of his friends who were communists get killed, and he knew that they were closing in on him. And so he goes down to the FBI and surrenders, and the FBI didn't believe him and wouldn't arrest him. And he's like, no, really, I'm a communist. I want to surrender. He's like, thanks, FBI. But anyway, this Operation Mockingbird. So they realized under Allen Dulles that if the CIA controlled the stories regarding foreign policy in the 25 major newspapers, then the smaller news outlets would just take that story and they could formulate it. This was actually acknowledged by Carl Bernstein, the one who did the Washington Post Watergate story breaking, that he acknowledged Rolling Stone magazine that the CIA had this Operation Mockingbird and it was controlling the media. And then they vowed, promised that they dismantled it. Yeah, okay. Does anybody really believe that? So there is this concept, but it was still considered pro-American. We sort of knew this was going on, but it was assumed it was for some purpose that was pro-American. We saw that change with Obama. Obama co-opted the IRS and used it as a political punishment arm for conservative organizations. And the lady who was the head of the IRS, her name escapes me right now, but she had met with Obama like over 140 times. And when she was called before Congress to testify, Lois Lerner, she pleaded the fifth, stood up and walked out. And in other words, yes, she did do what she was. You had Eric Holder. Mm-hmm. He was supplying guns to drug gangs in Mexico. He's called before the Congress, and he just walks out. And he's held in contempt of Congress, but he got away with it. And we began to see Department of Justice co-opted, the IRS co-opted, and then we began to see the intelligence agencies co-opted for political purposes, used to do opposition research on political candidates, dig up dirt on them. I even talked to a congressman with the House Ethics Committee. We like ethics. Yeah, that's good. Well, no. It was Nancy Pelosi in charge and putting all these people that all they did was dig up dirt on Republicans and get them to retire early. Otherwise, they would bring out stuff that was either compromising or could be spun to look compromising. So there was this rash of good Republican congressmen simply dropping out. I don't know if you remember that. So the co-opting of the federal agencies for political purposes is what happens in every third world country. And the telltale sign of this is they go after the former leader. Mm-hmm. Egypt, they do a regime change. They go after the former leader and his family, and they want to lock them away permanently. Mexico, you had a former leader, Pancho Villa. He's retired on his farm. Well, the new leader doesn't like that and sends him out to his farm to assassinate him, and Calles and all these. And so when you see a country want to go after a former leader and the former supporters of that leader, you're delving into a third world status. But it's ultimately, there's a global goal in mind. In America, there's a quote from Richard Wurmbrand, who had been a prisoner in communist Romania. And he said, I saw prisoners with 50-pound chains on their ankles praying for America, that the dike would hold, that she wouldn't cave, because if America falls, the whole world would fall. Yeah. And what are you going to have? China become the power, Russia become the power, Sharia, Islam become power. It's going to be a place the world will not be recognizable as far as individual liberties go.
It'll be, this is the last stand. This is the last place and it's, as you said in your book, if it took 6,000 years or 10,000 years for America to rise, the first think about like the first multi-celled organism, right? They said there's probably like a freak event in the oceans where finally like a proto-ribosome was taken in by a unicellular, and it's just given enough time with enough trillions upon trillions and quadrillions of little, one was going to ingest the other, and it's a matter of time, right? How did forest fires used to start before people? It's like, well, something will happen perfectly, a lightning strike, some dry brush, it will happen. But it took millennia for America to happen, where we have a separation of church and state, where you can say what you want, you can do what you want, you're free to do it. It took a long time, with some luck, and I would argue, with the grace of God, 13 colonies fighting the biggest military in the world, the biggest navy in the world. There's no reason to believe that it would take less than another 10,000 years for it to occur again. If it ever occurred again, because now there would be a coordinated effort to make sure it never happened again. And, I don't know if I'm just getting older and I'm becoming, it's a very weird thing for me. I'm 30 years old now, and, I'm never quite sure, have things always just been this chaotic throughout all of human history, and am I just old enough to see it now? Are we at a weird point of technological connectivity and information at our fingertips where, 100 years ago, no one in Maryland could just pick up a phone and see what's happening in Bangladesh? Like, I always have to kind of balance myself out. Like, are things getting more chaotic, or am I just older and I live in an information age and it seems like it's and I don't know, but it does seem like there is a slow, it's the anaconda like wrapping around the world. It seems like there is a plot slowly moving around the world, and then when it constricts, it's over. It's
the incidences have repeated themselves, but it's now taken on a more global dimension. In geometry, there's something called phi, P-H-I, or the Fibonacci sequence, where a number plus the previous number equals the next number, and that number plus the previous number equals the next number. It's a rate of geometric expansion that you observe in a seashell that does the little circle, a little bigger circle, a little bigger circle. You observe it in a tornado, in a hurricane, in a galaxy. And it is applied to different areas of study in academia. For example, investments. And if an investment's growing at a certain rate, and then at a certain rate, they plot, well, gee, it might follow this Fibonacci sequence and grow to this other rate and become big. And well, I decided to apply it historically. And you see from the beginning of human records, you have Nimrod Tower of Babel, and then you have Assyria become the big empire, and then conquered by Babylon. And then you have Egypt, and then Persia. Alexander the Great conquers that, and then the Romans conquer that, and then Chandragupta in India, and then you got 5,000 years of Chinese emperors that keep getting bigger and bigger, and then you have Genghis Khan conquers from Korea to Hungary. It's the biggest contiguous land empire in world history, kills 30 million people in the process. Then they have the maritime empires with Spain, and the sun never set on the Spanish Empire, and the Philippines, named after the King Philip of Spain, and then eventually England had the most powerful empire. And if these hadn't, if these dictators hadn't died off, any one of them would have been happy to have the whole world under their thumb. And they're all ruled through fear, and that's when Lucifer came to Jesus, and after he fasted for 40 days, bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world for their mind to give. And it's like, that's pretty audacious. When did you get them? Well, when Adam sinned. The Bible says, to whomever you yield your members, servants to obey, to him you are servants. So the moment Adam obeyed the serpent, obeyed the devil, he was posturing himself as the obeyer, and the devil as being in charge, and these different kingdoms grew. And anyway, see here. Am I still with you? I had a
you're good. Yeah, you
call.
You're good.
Yeah, and so as the centuries go on, these kingdoms get bigger, and until the King of England had the biggest, had Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, India, a quarter of the world's population, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, Canada, and America. Sun never set on the British Empire, Hong Kong, and if it wasn't for a 3,000-mile ocean separating us from England, if it wasn't for Americans having a century and a half practicing self-government and what I would call Judeo-Christian and even Protestant self-government, emphasizing responsibility of the individual versus, Mexico, that was discovered and founded earlier, but it didn't have that individual structured emphasis. And if it wasn't for France getting in the war, and France was the second biggest power in the world. And so the moment France got in the war, Britain had to stretch its military resources around the world, not just focus on putting down a little rebellion in the colonies. And all these ingredients came together to allow Americans to this window to be able to form a government where we flip it and make the people the king. So kings have subjects who are subjected to the king's will. Republics and democracies have citizens. The word citizen is Greek. It means co-king, co-ruler. So when we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic, a republic is where the people are king, ruling through representatives. We're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves. And so when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't want to be the king anymore. I protest this system where I participate in ruling myself. So it is taken a dimension that has never, a global dimension that has never taken before. Recently, I'm in South Florida. I was there at twilight, and I saw a bunch of stars that I had never seen before. And they looked sort of in a pattern that I had never seen before. And I'm like, this is strange. I actually got a binocular, I was looking at it, pull it up on my phone. Sure enough, it's Elon Musk's Starlink.
Yeah.
Now, I sort of like Elon Musk, but nevertheless, here we are putting a net of 5G satellites around the world that has never happened before, so that you can have instant, real-time downloading of movies and all that great stuff. And they can track you in real time anywhere on the entire planet. We're seeing, and dictators always want to track people. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, here's Augustus Caesar wanting to have a worldwide census. He wanted to track everyone whose lives he controlled. If he could have had satellites and cameras and, 5G, he would have used it. But we're seeing it, so we're seeing a dimension that we've never seen before. But the good Lord decided for you and I to be alive at this time, and he likes to wait until things look hopeless, and he raises up little nobodies. And so this is our chance to stand up and be strong for righteousness. And I do think it will come down. I love the picture of the baseball players kneeling in protest at the national anthem, and one player standing. They asked him afterwards why he stood. He goes, I only kneel to Jesus. And it's this concept that if the people that have a relationship with God won't cave to the group think, the group mentality, the group controlled information world, they have a backbone. But it's the people that don't have that relationship that'll say, okay, I got to take this vaccine or this mark in order to be able to buy and sell, and
It's and I know I said I'd only keep you for 30 minutes and I've kept you over, but yeah, just a couple another quick thing is I've had on this podcast Dr. Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven. I don't know if you've ever read that. He's a Harvard neurosurgeon who fell into a coma in, I believe, 2008, and he had like a 1 in 20 million chance of surviving, and he survived. And Harvard neurosurgeon, this guy was an atheist his whole life, and then he went and experienced heaven firsthand in his coma. And I've had my
own...
Excuse me?
What's the name of the book?
Proof of Heaven.
Okay.
By Eben Alexander, E-B-E-N. And I've had him on this podcast several times. And he has another book called Living in a Mindful Universe. But there's a point he goes into it, and it's one thing I often think about. I've been meditating every day for 13 years. I lost a sibling to suicide in 2014. I've had my own experiences with that. And as someone that went from Christian to atheist to agnostic to back to believing, Dr. Eben Alexander has this mental thought, I guess, exercise. And he says that not only are we here in this world for a test, but that we planned this test, that we are divine beings. We are part of God's perfect image. And for us to learn, much like football teams scrimmaging against each other, to learn new aspects that I like to think of it as a college course, but instead of a college course, it's a lifetime. And we're taking different lifetimes to get a higher education. We're trying to learn more about spirituality. His whole idea is you go into this life planning for disasters, for hardships, for challenges, to put yourself in a situation where you feel all is lost. And you do it, and you go into that life because it's only there that you truly push yourself to grow, to stand up for what's right, to possibly die for what you believe in. And when I look at what's going on in the world, on the surface, it does seem like all is lost. There's a global, godless, communist, Marxist plot to take over the world and enslave everyone. But then another part of me thinks, like, is it really an accident that I'm here? Like, is it really just an accident that I'm here? Or as you've said a couple times in this podcast, we're alive here and now. It's our turn. I can't help but think we're here to learn something. And I don't know if that means that we succeed in this life Maybe the game's not designed to be won. Maybe you're supposed to fight overwhelming odds, D-Day, they actually did win. But, I mean, maybe you just go and you die, but you're fighting against the Nazis. I can't help but think I'm here to do something, to stand up for what's right, and to try to leave the world better than I found it. And I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's just, for a long time I thought it was a terrible punishment from the universe, from God, that I lost a sibling. But now it's been 7 years, and I realize just how instrumental that was in creating who I am today. And I don't think it was an accident. I don't think anything's an accident. I think you and I are talking to each other for whatever reason. I do think we're here for a purpose. I can't claim to know what it is. I can't be that bold. But I don't think this is all an accident, that it seems like it's going to hell in a handbasket. I think we're here to learn something. I don't know what. But I think it's to be the best person you can be. It's to stand up when the tidal wave's coming and still clench your fists and be like, bring it on. Like, it might be game over, right? But it's the tidal wave's coming, and plant your feet and be like, whatever, let's go out in a blaze of glory. Let's go to Valhalla. I can't help but think maybe that's just a protective mechanism so I don't go insane. I don't know. There wasn't really a question in there. I just kind of rambled that, and you had to sit there. But I do think that there's a purpose to it. I just don't know what.
Yeah, I think about those deep thoughts often. And the idea is that here's God. He makes everything. He exists for eternity. It's not that he knows everything. It's impossible for him not to know everything. Yeah. Everything he makes follows rules, like a programmer, right? You got the machine code and the DOS and apps and Windows, and it all builds upon itself. And and everything he makes is ordered and ruled. So God is a God of rules and order. In other words, he's just, and he exists for eternity, and everything obeys him. And I was looking at a special on the Hubble telescope, 2003. They focused it on a little spot in the sky. It was so small, if you were to take a grain of sand, hold it between your fingers against the night sky, they focused the telescope on it for 2 weeks. There was nothing there. Yeah. They developed the images. In that little spot was 10,000 galaxies with 1 trillion stars in each galaxy. And then they looked in other places, and they realized that this universe is immensely, incomprehensibly bigger than anybody ever thought. The biggest star they found is Stephenson 2-18. It's so big, it's a super gas giant. If you were to put it in our solar system, it would engulf the orbit of Saturn, the 6th planet of the sun. We're the 3rd planet. And so here's God. He makes everything. To him, spaces and dimension size is nothing. The little teeny thing and the big thing. He makes everything obeys him. And it's almost like he said, been there, done that. Yeah. I can make things that obey me. And so sometime in eternity past, he said, I would really like someone in my image that could love me. Now it gets interesting, because love, by definition, must be voluntary. Yes. So in a framework of everything he does control is this little bitty area that he created, something that he does not totally control, your will. Okay. And he sets up this thing we call reality, where you get the opportunity to express your will of choosing him or rejecting him. And so if you, I think of, imagine AI, like you are going to create an AI robot. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah. Let's say you create a bunch of them, and they can think for themselves, reason for themselves. And then let's say that about a third of them decide they want to kill you. It's like, whoa, okay, this isn't what I intended. So you lock them up, but you still want to create, because it's just you that exists for eternity. So you create, but this time you have a controlled environment, a big warehouse where you create a virtual world. And you hardwire each AI robot to only be on for 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, boom, all of them are shut off. But in that 10 years, each one will be presented with a choice of wanting to kill you, or they would voluntarily, out of love for you, shut themselves off before they would ever do anything against you. So 10 years runs its course. They're all turned off. which ones would you be inclined to want to reactivate?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Well, it would be the ones that would rather shut themselves off before they would do anything against you. So you reactivate them. You, in a sense, resurrect them.
Sure.
Right? And now you can take off the limited 10-year capability and let them live forever. And you can let them out of the warehouse and you can enjoy heaven with them forever and not have to worry about some of them behind your back trying to plot to kill you. Well, what do you do with the other ones? Yeah, you sort of melt them down, right? And so the idea is that God hides himself behind reality, because if he ever revealed himself, I mean, here he is. He makes everything. I mean, these immense universes. He is so incomprehensibly awesome that if he were to reveal himself, every atom in your body would immediately fall flat in front of him. And he wouldn't know if you loved him for him or if you actually made a willful decision to love him.
Okay.
So I tell people, imagine a billionaire has a son who goes to college and he's driving a Lamborghini, right? A Porsche. I mean, he's got gold rings, fancy clothes. He's going to have every girl on campus wanting to meet him. But if he lays that aside, comes to earth, rests, with driving an old clunker, and he's got holes in his jeans, the uppity girls are going to ignore him. But some girl would like to study with him in the library.
Yeah.
They get to be friends. They have an ice cream cone together. They fall in love. They get engaged. And then he says, hey, I want to take you back to meet my dad. And they're driving up to this mansion. And this girl says, whoa, that's your dad? You didn't tell me about all this. He knows that she loves him for him, not because of all of his stuff.
Okay.
So here's God, totally awesome. And he'd have every ladder climber. Yeah, I'm with you. But no, he lays all that aside, right? So God sends his son Jesus, born and humbled in a manger. Isaiah 53 says there's nothing in him that would cause us to be attracted to him. I mean, he wasn't probably handsome or whatever. And but it allows those that love him, his word, he demonstrates the love of God, healing people and forgiving people. And so if we're made in God's image, what's the most important thing in your life? Well, partly it's loving and being loved. I mean, you don't have a guy on his deathbed saying, I wish I spent more time at the office, No, and then tell my wife I love her, tell my kids I love them. And if we're made in God's image, maybe love is really important to God. And if he controls everything and everything obeys him, nothing can love him. And so he created this again, something he didn't totally control inside of a framework that he does totally control. I mean, he controls time. I mean, I don't understand how even that works, but he controls all matter. He controls all space. He controls everything. But he created this one little thing inside of the framework he does control, something he doesn't control, your will. So that you have the choice. I mean, if you were God and you were wanting to populate heaven, wouldn't you want the people to be there, to want to be there, to want to be with you, right? To want to love you. And so the more you love someone, the more you want that someone to love you back. God loves you infinitely. He has an infinite desire for you to love him back, but he cannot force you to love him, because the very moment he would force you to love him, he himself would know he's forcing you, and he would know that your response is not a love response. It'd just be a manipulated response. He's been there, done that. He can make things and manipulate things to do things, right? If he actually wants someone that can love him, right? And anyway.
No, you're right, because if he's around for an infinite amount of time, he's already played the game of creating things that love him. He's already done that an infinite number of times. It's what Alan Watts said, right? The philosopher. He said, imagine if you were God. No, he has this little blurb. Alan Watts died in 1973, but he has this little blurb, what if God got bored? And he said, imagine if you had the power to dream every night, any dream you wanted to dream. And 8 hours of time would be the equivalent of 75 years of life. And you did this dream every night. Well, the very first thing you would do is you'd fulfill all your pleasures. You'd fulfill everything you've ever wanted, every woman, every drug, every material pleasure. And then as the months went on, at 75 years a night, you'd be a hero. You'd win the Super Bowl. You'd be a warrior. You'd slay the dragon. And then as time went on, you would do scarier and scarier things. And then you would start, after years of this, of 75 years a night, you would start to slowly suspend your powers, knowing that you would always wake up. And then finally, you would just push it further and further of, what if I forgot what it was like to be God? And you would push it further and further, because you'd be anxious and scared, and you'd wake up and, whew, yeah, we're all good. He says, well, finally, you would dream where you are right now, living the life you're living today. And that is how God experiences reality anew. It make things, like a baby, like the spring. How do you experience things new? And to me, I take that as sort of a different version of what you're saying. But instead of being God, it's God saying, he's done everything. And what would it be like if I created these little people? Oh, some of them don't like me. Some of them want to kill me. Some of them are terrible. Some of them create concentration camps and blow up nuclear weapons. Some of them are really good. Some of them do.
Well, and then there's another aspect. Okay, God is just.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? He's a God of rules. Everything he creates has rules. He has rules for human behavior. We just have the choice as to whether or not we're going to follow those rules. But God is just, which means he has to judge every sin. If he lets a sin slide, he'd effectively be giving consent to that sin. Right? Every little kid knows this. The parent says, don't do that, don't do that. They do it anyway, and they don't get in trouble for it, so they know, hey, this is okay to do. And if God doesn't judge a sin, he's effectively giving consent. In law, silence equals consent. Mm-hmm. Remember the wedding ceremonies? The pastor says, whoever's against this wedding, speak now or forever hold your peace. If you are sitting there silent, your silence is giving consent to the wedding. So if the just God is being silent when there's sins going on, his silence would be giving consent to the sin. And if God gives consent to sin, he's no longer a just God. He denies his just nature. He denies himself. And that's the one thing that cannot be changed. God cannot deny himself. He is a just God, which means his very nature is that he has to judge every sin. But God is love, and that he provided the lamb to take the judgment for the sin. So if you read the story of Abraham and his son Isaac, and they're going to the top of Mount Moriah, and Isaac says, Father, we have the wood for the sacrifice, we have the coals for the sacrifice, but where is the sacrifice? And Abraham says, Son, God will provide himself a sacrifice. And it can be understood two ways. God will have a ram up in the bush that we can sacrifice, or God will provide himself as the sacrifice. And that's what happened. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, the only begotten Son of God, became man, became the sacrifice, and he took the judgment for everyone's sins. So God is just in that he judges every sin, but he's loving that he provided a lamb to take the judgment for the sin. And so if you think of it as a scale, an eternal being who's innocent suffering for a finite period of time is equal to all the finite beings who are guilty suffering for an eternal period of time. Mm-hmm. Let me say that again. An eternal being who's innocent suffering for a finite period of time is equal to all the finite beings who are guilty suffering for an eternal period of time. In other words, infinity times finite equals finite times infinity. And so Peter said that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. Jesus experienced that day on the cross, that day of judgment, as if it was 1,000 years. In other words, he literally suffered the equivalent of eternal damnation in all of our places, and he's the only one that could have done it, right? An eternal, innocent being who took the judgment of God upon himself on the cross. So that's why we approach God through the Lamb. We approach God through the Lamb, that the judgment, but in this way, it maintains that God can be a just God, but he's also a loving God.
I think it's beautiful. I think we need to set up a part 2, because I've kept you for an hour and 4 minutes, and I said I'd keep you for 30. So clearly I cannot be trusted, but.
Well, I look forward to doing it again.
Yes, sir.
So just let me know when.
Yes, sir. I'll email you. Dr. Federer, thank you so much. Your book, which actually the majority of the podcast, we didn't even really touch on it. So I would say everyone go grab it. It's a fantastic
listen. Oh, excuse me a second.
Yeah.
Here it is. So Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present. Subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crisis to Consolidate Control. It's on Amazon, but we have a website, AmericanMinute.com. Send out a free daily email called American Minute. You can sign up for it. And again, thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I'll put that link in the description, everybody. And until next time, and I'll send it to you when this video is up, okay?
All right.
All right. Thank you, sir. God bless everybody. God bless America. Stay safe, everybody. Dr. Federer, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.